Une des ambitions de la journée, c'était bien d'illustrer à travers différentes études et réflexions sur 3 pays européens la diversité de la façon dont la transition énergétique prend forme et corps à travers différentes réalités locales et nationales. La première session était consacrée donc à l'Allemagne et la session qu'on va entamer maintenant est donc dédiée à notre autre voisin de l'Ouest, le Royaume Uni. Alors le Royaume-Uni, on va le voir, a une réalité certes économique, démographique, politique comparable à l'Allemagne, mais une réalité aussi dans la façon dont elle développe ses politiques et en matière d'énergie, entre autres, et de réduction de CO2 assez différente de ce qui se fait en Allemagne. Ça ne veut pas dire moins dynamique, mais différente, dans une réalité différente. Alors, en particulier, en Royaume-Uni, on n'a pas le Énergie 22, mais on a des tas de choses aussi foisonnantes et dynamiques. Par exemple, le très sophistiqué Green Deal, qui est d'une grande complexité à mettre en œuvre. Et on a aussi une réalité qui est une volonté du gouvernement britannique de déconcentrer ou décentraliser, en tout cas, l'appareil industriel à travers des initiatives de métropolisation et en particulier ce qu'on appelle le concept de city region, dont, entre autres, Larry va parler. Donc, nos illustrations vont se faire à travers 2 interventions. La première de Stephen Hall de l'université de Leeds au Royaume-Uni, qui va nous présenter en fait une approche, on va dire un peu systémique des politiques locales en matière d'urbanisme, d'infrastructures, de gouvernance des infrastructures et de développement durable pour soutenir une société plus bas carbone. Et on passera ensuite la parole à Larry Reynolds, qui donc était notre principal partenaire dans le cadre de notre partenariat avec l'Institut des études avancées, et qui nous parlera, lui, plutôt d'illustration d'études de cas britanniques dans le cadre de la mise en œuvre du concept de city region. Voilà. Donc, Stéphane, you have next 30 minutes are yours. And we will keep, as we made for the first session, we will keep the discussion at the end of both interventions. Okay? Thank you.
Perhaps if I do that, yeah, that makes more sense. Okay, it's interesting, isn't it, that even when you don't understand French, you can understand the UK's Green Deal was a bad idea and not very well executed.
I said sophisticated.
I had complexity, I definitely did. Anyway, so what I'm going to do for perhaps the next 20 minutes is to speak about 3 research projects of mine or that I've undertaken with other researchers on whole systems approaches to distributed energy futures in the UK. And I've entitled this, What Does Civic Energy Need to Thrive? It already exists in the UK, but I was more interested in, what does it need to be kind of healthy and robust, and what might it look like into the future? I'm going to focus on whole systems analysis in the first instance, and then I'm going to speak a little bit about business model innovation, and then I'm going to reflect on financial structures that are necessary for civic energy. Perhaps it's very strange for me to be sat down. I'm usually kind of moving around, so I hope I won't fall off my chair, but I kind of get quite excited. But let me just start by then reflecting on the first piece, which is the Distributing Power report. There are links online and on my person page and from the University of Bath, but this was produced by a large interdisciplinary research consortium called the Realising Transition Pathways Consortium. It was 3.17 million consortium, ran from off the back of an already successful consortium called Transition Pathways. And really, that was this is or was an interdisciplinary project, everything from political economists such as myself to power systems engineers and social scientists. And it did take 8 years for us to find a common language, but we got there in the end. And now the whole output of the project is online. What I want to do is focus on the distributing power report, but it's worth just saying that this research consortium, which I think Larry's going to touch on as well, looked at the scenarios for the decarbonisation of the UK's energy system and said, well, that's all very nice, but there's no treatment within these scenarios. These are the 2050 scenarios that we had at a government level. Said there's no kind of governance logic within those scenarios. So what we did was build 3 scenarios which half-hourly balance, which meet decarbonisation goals, but more clearly reflect what it means if government leads an energy transition, or if the market leads an energy transition, or if indeed civil society leads an energy transition. And we kind of understood what a government-led pathway might look like. It might look like more nuclear, it would certainly be quite centralised, we might have more offshore wind, for example, coal CCS. In terms of the market pathway, and that was the central coordination, that pathway was called, but that's the state doing most of the work. In the market pathway, that's kind of what we have at the minute, a relatively competitive energy market in both generation and supply, and the state kind of sets the framework and allows it to happen. Again, we see quite a lot of centralised generation and some CCS. But in the Thousand Flowers pathway, and if you want to know where that comes from, that was a quote by Chairman Mao, so you'll get an idea that this has got some quite alternative politics in there. But this is saying that civic society and civil society leads the energy transition. And what it basically was a very, like, in the technological spreadsheets that the power systems people put together, it was much more decentralised. So we had a decentralised technical pathway, but we needed to really understand what would that mean in terms of the energy market, regulation, policy, business models. And that was the project of the Distributing Power Report. I haven't brought any of those with me. You can get them online, and if you are desperate for a hard copy, they are very pretty because we spent a lot on the production of them. But if you really want a hard copy, just email me and I'll send you one. But that's available online. And what I want to talk through, I don't want to kind of dig into that too deeply. I just want to reflect on what were the 5 headline messages from that piece of work. So this was a whole group of us there, from the power systems engineers, from the the people who understand how electrical systems work inside out, all the way through to social theorists, sitting down and saying, what would a civic energy sector really need in the UK? What would it mean to have this decentralised transition? And it was helpful for us to have a technological pathway as well, because we could say, well, actually, what would you need to get that amount of solar on the system? What does that mean in terms of interconnection? And so the first headline message from that report was that a distributed energy system opens up new avenues for financing the energy transition. That was quite clear. But it does challenge incumbent utility business models. There are myriad platforms now for getting involved in civic energy. You can go online and you can invest in abundance generation. You can become part of a cooperative. And the growth of a decentralised sector would mean there would be new sources of finance for the energy transition. And finance is often missing in a lot of these analyses, which is a gap that I've tried to fill. It also opens up the energy system for intervention by citizens and municipalities in a way that hasn't been thought of before. And yes, that undercuts that traditional utility business model. And we had to find a way to allow that utility business model, at least in the first 20 years, to still operate, because if it didn't, then we would have some serious systemic issues. A lot of the narrative was, oh, let's get rid of them big nasty utilities. But as soon as you start digging into the data in the spreadsheets, you still need them. The second headline message from that report was that a local and regional approach to distributed energy is vital. And this touches on the second presentation of the first session, in that there needs to be space for different evolutions of or different transition pathways at the local level. What is suitable in northwest England is not suitable in terms of southeast England, and that's not just because of the solar irradiation or the amount of hydro capacity. It's because they've got different economies and they've got different disposable incomes and they've got different stresses on the physical networks as well. And so what we cast there, and what you see on the slide, and I'll reflect on these again in a moment, is this archetype, this system archetype. And right in the middle of that, this is where I usually get up and start pointing at arrows, so you'll just have to bear with me. So in the middle, you've got this MO-ESCO, or Municipal ESCO. And one of the lessons that we took from the German case was that if you have a proliferation of distributed energy and municipal energy companies operating a normal payment per kilowatt hour unit volume model, it's very likely that you're going to undercut those municipal utilities, and there's going to create tension between two communities, i.e. civil society and municipal governance, that should probably be working together. And an ESCO is selling energy services as opposed to units of heat and power. So in such a way, it doesn't matter if people use less. It doesn't matter if they have a smarter orchestration of the technology, because the service provider still allows the system to run, because the revenues that they generate are not from more and more unit sales. And that's kind of drawn out fully in the report. The third headline message, and this is what power systems and energy people like to bring up, is these graphs and say this is what the energy mix looks like under this pathway. This is not a prediction of the future, but in order to allow that pathway to happen, we still require new infrastructures and emerging technologies, and one of the biggest new infrastructures we needed for this pathway was heat networks and urban heat networks. We don't have urban heat networks in the UK. Because we had a dash to North Sea gas, because our North Sea gas was so cheap, it made sense for us all to every single individual home, even in a dense urban area, to have its own gas boiler. And that means that putting in a heat network now in any city in the UK just struggles to make sense economically, whereas technically and from an environmental perspective, it's great, but it's difficult to get them to happen. So we still need new infrastructures in there, and that does include smart grids, and it does include smart metering. And even in a decentralised energy pathway where we pushed it as hard as we could in terms of the spreadsheets, you still need some level of CCS to meet demand in a sensible kind of way. The fourth headline message was, and this landed quite hard, I think, on some of the advocates of community and citizen energy in the UK, was that we still require in that pathway some level of international interconnection. You know, we still require transmission level generation, and distributed energy is not a method of grid defection. And that was one of the things that, or the misconceptions perhaps, that the sector in the UK had been labouring under, is that, well, if we just set up enough energy cooperatives and if we just do enough kind of citizen finance of energy, maybe we can kind of defect entirely from this system. And even when we push it really hard in terms of what we think we could achieve, that it doesn't seem to be possible. And equally also, if you are going to push a decentralised system, if you're going to do so, not just build two systems, not just build a transmission level system that can provide backup capacity and a distributed system which does all the nice smart stuff, then if you're going to do that within a reasonable cost framework, you need really to get serious about demand-side participation and demand-side response, and sort of net demand reduction as well. So you'll see that the household demand in this pathway is much, much lower than in the other two pathways. And we think that that's sensible, because if you are invested in a system, you are more likely to change your demand profile accordingly. So they were the 5 headline messages from the Distributing Power Report. Some of them sat well with people who do citizen energy for a while, and some of them sat not so well. The kind of hard-nosed energy system side that came up with some solutions that they didn't like, but it did create some interest in what it would actually mean to deliver that pathway. And we presented that to Scottish Government. Scottish Government are more interested than the English Government, if you like, in citizen energy at the moment. It's been used by the other International Energy Agency down the road, and it was presented at the Paris COP. It led to further work with our Department for Energy and Climate Change, and there's a scientific paper in energy policy, and has been for a while. And it's also led to new partnerships and impacts for the early career researchers who put the project together as well. So that worked very nicely. It's had a lot of impact, And it led to the next piece of work that I'm going to speak about, which was under a different research consortium called iBuild. I have to get these in right because I'm being recorded, so this is who funded the next one. But the iBuild consortium is infrastructure business models, and the critical element in there is local business models. And that was a report that I have brought some copies of, and I'll leave at the back later, so they look like this. And an academic paper as well that's also in energy policy. And what this is saying is, look, the UK government came out and said, after May 2010, when we had a Conservative majority, we're going to cut the tariffs for onshore wind, for solar. We're going to reduce these subsidies. And what that led the distributed energy promoters to say was, we need to find new business models. We need to find business models that work without as much subsidy as they have done in the past. And we think that means participating in the supply market. So it's no longer good enough to just participate in wholesale generation and get a subsidy. We need to start thinking about smarter applications in the supply market. So what myself and my colleague Katie Rowlock did was look at, well, how is the system set up now in the UK and how does it actually work? And the simplest way that we could represent the system is in this archetype where you've got energy payments and balancing. And we thought, okay, well, what does this mean for the existing power purchase agreements? What does it mean for the existing generators? And what opportunities are being missed? So we did that, and this is all, there are 9 of these archetypes in this report, and we explored each one of them in turn for the UK market. If you did this job for the French market or the German market, you'd be doing a different thing, but the process is the same. So that's our centralised system archetype as it is at the moment. Local energy sort of has to interface with some of the larger utilities to find itself a route to market. I've already spoken in the previous session about the potential for the kind of energy Uber. The metaphor does break down under closer scrutiny, but essentially everybody kind of understands what it is because it's an online trading platform for renewable energy. So you can go online as a business building bicycles, for example, and say, right, this is our annual demand. We want to buy that annual demand from the wind farm down the road or the anaerobic digestion plant. And in so doing, meet our demand with renewable energy in a much more, a much closer integration with the generators. So that exists. It's called Open Utility, and it's a commercial to commercial platform in the UK at the moment. And then we scoped out, well, what does that mean? What does that mean for the system? What does it mean for the participants? And again, that's all in the report. The second, and you can see already that from that, which is already a characterization of a really complicated marketplace, to that, regardless of where the arrows go and what they mean, this is a more complex system with more actors involved, and it means like pooling and balancing local generation before it's added to the kind of national pool, so that you're doing more self-consumption but behind a virtual meter of aggregated properties rather than aggregating properties up within a national market. I'm not going to dig into these. What I'm saying is it's important, if you want to understand how civic energy can develop beyond where it is now, is to start thinking about the different models that it could utilise in a smarter energy system. And the messages from that research, and you can read into it in as much depth as you like. There's plenty of depth there to send you to sleep on an evening. But the real messages for that was, if you focus on the value proposition, what is it that the centralised system is missing that could be offered by the civic energy sector, and work outwards from there, you'll have a more consistent analysis. And you quite quickly come to see that there are barriers in regulation, there are barriers in the way that the markets are set up, there are barriers in terms of customer segmentation. Some of these models only serve high demand customers well, who have got the ability to kind of strip out different things and buy appliances that can be subject to demand response. And there are some of these business models that are more sensible for interacting with the fuel pool. And you can find that there are some technology needs to allow them to happen, but actually we found that the technology exists. It's the market and regulatory structures and the business models that need to kind of catch up to make best use of them. And finally, in this piece of work, it was clear again that there was a bit of a finance gap. And well, I'll talk about that finance gap in a moment, but I just wanted to reflect on the impact that this research had. And because it was a kind of a dig into what are the business models, how would it work, what is the regulation, what is the policy need, it was very kind of instrumental. It meant that it had quite clear impacts with the Department for Energy and Climate Change. It was obvious that it could be incorporated into energy policy. It's been used again by the International Energy Agency, and it has had international impacts, but I won't focus on that now. And it's kind of brought us into that government discussion because we've got something to kind of say to it. But I'll just move on to that finance gap because I think that's a critical problem. In the way that the UK is, I can't evidence this beautifully in terms of empirics, but it's just a nice comparison to say, look, in the German system, you've got maybe 1,600 energy suppliers. At municipal and cooperative level, you could go up to big utilities, small utilities, all different types, and you can choose to go with a massive utility or a very tiny Stadtwerke. Similarly, in the German system of renewable energy finance, you could go to a big bank, a big commercial bank like Deutsche Bank, or you can go to the Sparkassen, which are the local savings banks. You can go to the cooperative banks. You can access a whole range and set of different scales of finance. In the UK, up until about 2 years ago, we had 6 massive energy companies that dominated the supply market and 6 massive commercial banks that dominated the finance landscape. And if you look at the way that current accounts are set up in Germany, you see that, again, like most people have got a current account with their local bank, albeit it might be a Sparkassen, but it's its own individual bank for that local area. And it's a much more diverse banking sector. And the same in the UK, the exact opposite is true. Even me, I'm quite kind of left-leaning. I have, I'm quite kind of militant when it comes to finance. I've got a Barclay card. I've got a current account with one of the big banks. That's just normal. We don't have that local savings bank. We don't have. We got rid of our building societies. Our cooperative bank is no longer a cooperative bank. It's owned by a hedge fund. So it's that level of civic finance it doesn't exist. So that means that if you've got a £10 million project, a civic energy project, it's very difficult to find the right, or it has been traditionally very difficult to find the right level of finance. I mean, you can always get a loan, right? HSBC will always give you a loan, but the price of that finance is important if you're dealing with quite thin margins, particularly when you have renewable subsidy regression. So we found that whilst the previous presentation was really interesting in terms of, the different actors and different constellations of actors that need to come together to make it work. In the UK, what we saw is we had a consistent gap. The consistent gap was kind of local finance that understood the area, that was kind of tied to that local area and wanted to see that local area do well. And that still hasn't really changed in the UK, and that is a shift that would take quite a long time for it to go away. And because we are academics and we wrote a paper about it because that's all we know how to do. So that paper is in Energy Research and Social Science. So to kind of conclude, to thrive, civic energy in the UK does need new business models. Yes, in generation, but also supply and perhaps distribution as well. Our distribution networks, unlike, I use the German example because I did a piece of comparative work there. In Germany, the distribution grid concessions come up for renewal perhaps every 20 years. So there is an option there for the civic energy sector to take an ownership stake if they wish. In the UK, that doesn't happen. We have 7 distribution companies that just run the distribution networks, and it's a tiny, tiny chink in that is starting to happen. Whether or not it's a good thing or a good idea is beyond my analysis, but there is no way for the civic energy sector to take ownership of those assets at the moment. We need new institutions of finance in the UK. We have, in the past 2 years, really seen a growth in Abundance Generation, which is an online crowdfunding platform. some of the local economic development local economic development partnerships have set up local banking, but really, really niche, like a tiny, minuscule percentage of financial transactions in the UK might go through what I would call the alternative finance sector. We need more compatible market and regulatory structures. We currently treat every electron as if it's been generated in the far north of Scotland and it's been used in the southeast of England. So we need a regulatory structure that can recognise the benefits of local generation. And my kind of final concluding point was, I cannot see, and this is just my personal opinion from the research that I've undertaken, I can't see the civic energy sector in the UK really thriving without strong municipal involvement. And that's largely because in order to thrive, it needs to interact much better with the supply market. And if it's going to interact much better with the supply market, it needs to partner with institutions that are big enough and can deal with technological and regulatory risk of the level that it would be to enter into the electricity market. I'm not going to dwell on that because I know Larry's got some reflections on that. And it has to integrate with whole systems transitions. It's no good to have a continuing kind of militance against, well, it's just the big system and not strip out whether or not you're talking about a utility or government or a regulator. The civic energy sector needs to understand where its place can be and what it can contribute, because there has been, not perhaps in academic circles, but certainly in terms of some of the way that community energy has been set up in the UK, it's been about put a solar panel on your house and you can defect from the energy system and you can just kind of island yourself off from the rest of the energy transition. And I don't think that's particularly helpful. And that is sort of being shown up a little in Germany at the moment. And I think that's all I wanted to say. So bank your questions for later. Thanks.
So thank you, Stephen, for this very lightning speech on the UK situation. On va maintenant passer la parole à notre second intervenant, Larry Reynolds, donc, qui a consacré ses derniers 18 mois, en fait, à effectuer, dans le cadre du partenariat entre EDF Recherche et Développement et l'Institut des études avancées, une recherche à la fois conceptuelle, méthodologique, mais aussi basée empiriquement, je dirais, étayée, sur la question de la métropolisation, de la décentralisation et donc du rôle des acteurs locaux et des systèmes locaux dans la transition énergétique vers une société plus bas carbone. Donc ces travaux ont porté sur le Royaume-Uni et plus récemment sur l'Allemagne. Néanmoins, aujourd'hui, il se concentrera sur la première partie de ces travaux, donc les travaux consacrés au Royaume-Uni. Larry, are you ready?
Yes.
So the next 13 minutes are yours, and after we'll have a question and answer time before lunch.
Okie doke. Well, thank you everyone for coming. I'd like to thank Electricity de France for sponsoring this workshop and also my research for the past year and a bit, and the IES for housing it. What I'm going to talk about is a new trend, really, which was marked in 2015, last year, in the UK. This was the emergence of new local government electricity supply companies or energy supply companies. These are the first of their kind in Britain since 1948, when in the 1940s they were the last of the municipal energy companies. There were around 400 of them, and they were all abolished with the nationalisation of the electricity industry in Britain and the centralisation of the industry. So this is an interesting new phenomena that they've resurfaced in a totally different environment. This study focuses on 5 that were launched last year. It's specifically looking at those local authorities entering the domestic electricity and gas retail supply markets. So there are other kind of forms of municipal energy company emerging, maybe around district energy and district heating, or maybe providing industrial customers with energy, but these are entering into the retail market. It's a small project. I mean, I've done a German case study and a British case study, so they're just very brief surveys of what's going on to try and get a general feeling of developments, and also to contribute to the scholarly debate about the position of municipal energy within the different transition pathways that Stephen referred to. My evidence comes from analysis of official documents from local government and associated bodies and interviews. So just following on really from Stephen's presentation, you know, to look at really the municipal energy company, the idea of the municipal energy company, and the Realizing Transitions Pathway Consortium, they locate municipal energy companies firmly within the civil society transition pathway. And really, you know, to explain the logic of why a civil society transition pathway is important, so the idea really that the more that democratic and social logics, environmental logics can be brought into the energy system that are outside the strictly commercial and competitive logics which dominate the current system. And it's the idea that if alternative logics can somehow gain attraction within the energy system and kind of bend it in a different direction, and it might allow more space for new kinds of innovation, not just technological innovation, but innovations in social practices around energy production and consumption. New innovations which kind of need a protective niche away from the current regime, which is very, very dominated by a competitive market and a raft of dominant incumbent players who in Britain are called the Big Six energy suppliers. But of course, when we look at municipal energy, or when we look at these three transition pathways of state, market, and civil society, or whether they're transition logics, we don't really find them operating separately or in their pure form. You know, it's not true to say that the municipal energy company is somehow located in the civil society logic, but EDF or British Gas are just located in a market logic or a state logic with, you know, we look at EDF, it's 80% owned by the French government, and yet it operates within a liberalized market. These are operating in hybrid. So when we look at the dynamics around the municipal energy company, there's, you know, it's working within an interface, really, of state, civil society, and market logics. And if you really want to understand social theory, how does a sociologist explain what is a social logic? This answers it. Really, they're colored rectangles with words on. Anyway, my little jolly. So to look at how these social logics operate within the around municipal energy company, my analysis is based really that if the municipal energy company operates at the intersection of these three logics, then it has to balance between a whole range of tensions. It has to make strategic choices around these different logics. And the reason I chose the municipal energy company, say a community energy co-op, sits far more within the civil society pathway. The municipal energy company, because it's part of a local government, it has to operate within state hierarchies, government regulations, It also has to operate as an energy company within all the competitive arrangements of the energy market. It has to compete on cost. The municipal energy company, in a way, uniquely sits within all these different logics. But this kind of trilemma points to the main paradox I've identified within energy municipalisation in the UK. So this really only happens in 2015. And one of the striking findings, really, is the space that is the economic and political space that has allowed this new business model to emerge in the UK has been permitted by market liberalisation. You know, these were wiped out by nationalisation in the 1940s, a very dirigist, state-led paradigm. This centralised paradigm continued under privatisation. It led to a quasi-monopoly of the big six. But then electricity market liberalisation, it unbundles the electricity system. It unbundles supply, which is retailing electricity, from transmission, from generation. It breaks up territorial monopolies, and it encourages consumers to switch between different energy companies, not to stick with one energy company, but to be mobile. And so, you know, you look at the Competition and Markets Authority in the UK, it's saying we want to rectify the defects in the energy system by encouraging more competition, by encouraging a more diversity of smaller actors in the supply market. And yet this municipalization is heralded by many of its proponents as deprivatization. It is the end of neoliberal energy. We are seeing public sector, democratic and public rationales reclaiming control of the energy system, and yet this is happening through increasingly liberalized markets. What a lovely paradox for the social scientist and the theorist. And this is a marked difference in a way from the Deutsche, the German Energiewende, where the Stadtwerke really already inherit the last kilometer of the distribution system. The battle in Germany has been over gaining control of the local physical distribution network. But as Stephen said, in the UK, this is just well beyond the bounds. Maybe there's a few local authorities like Woking with some kind of ancient private wire system. But the only way a new local authority energy company can reach its local population as customers is by being a retail operation. They don't own the transmission network. They can just go, hi, do you want to switch to us and buy it off us? They can advertise and encourage switching. So this paradox of deprivatization and intensified liberalization, and again, it raises the question, which way is this phenomena going to go? So that's my lovely paradox. The new energy companies have to enter as competitive agents in a highly competitive marketplace. Britain is where neoliberal energy liberalization began. It's where the virtue or the cancer of liberalization began, and now it has metastatized across Europe. Halfway? Halfway. Okay. Speed up, get there. Right, which is a very, very good. So my questions are then really to come down from this grandiose tripartite logic, my more basic, sensible questions to help EDF also get a grip on the thing is how and why, just simple, why and how are local authorities in the UK doing this? How is really what pathways are they adopting, what models are they adopting, and why are they doing this? What WTF, why are they doing this? What are the rationales they're adopting? How do they rationalize their actions? And what are the different rationales to be found in the field? The next question is, what are the common features to be found across all these 5 energy companies, and what are the divergences? And finally, my question is, what tensions and contradictions can I identify within this field? And just to say, I'll come on to this, how come that's just gone way ahead? Okay, right. And the 5 energy companies, I'll come on to this in a bit. I haven't selected them from a big sample. They're a self-selecting sample. They're just the first 5 to emerge in the UK. They've selected themselves. Just to prove that I'm not just making up this tripartite logic stuff out of my own critical theory head, having read too much Habermas or something. This is a quotation from Bristol Energy, an internal official document from last summer. And the Bristol Energy Company, they say, the council is proposing to establish an energy company that will span 3 significant areas. These being the local authority arena, in other words, the state logic in the local level of the local state, the energy market arena, the market logic, and the sustainability, social, ethical arena. You know, this is somehow maybe the civil society or the democratic logic, but maybe it's just this other logic, which is neither state nor market, but is something else. Now, so this is my 5 that I've been looking at. Self-selected, they selected themselves by doing it. Looking just really to explain what they are. So the first 2, go down the left-hand column, the blue column. Nottingham and Bristol are both large regional metropolitan cities. The big regional cities of Britain of millions, big cities or big size. The bottom 3 are smaller local authorities. Cheshire is a county council of a kind of rural region. Peterborough and Southend are borough councils of medium-sized provincial towns. The big distinction, really, you can see between the green and the orange categorization of the middle column. The first 2 have developed their own supply licenses. I'll explain this in more detail in a few slides. They've developed the big issue that emerged as a kind of the actor's own definition within energy municipalization of local authorities was how to access the electricity market. And in Britain, it's illegal to sell electricity without a supply license. But getting a supply license, it's really, really complex, technically, legally, commercially. So 2, the big authorities have got their own licenses, a big hurdle, and the 3 smaller ones have gone into partnership with a private commercial company who already have a supply license. But that's become the big dichotomy, independence or partnership. That's the way it's done. And the last column is when they were launched. The first one was launched in March 2015, the last in December, or maybe even the beginning of this year. It's kind of launching a bit. I call them the fledgling 5, and they kind of bounce along a bit like a little bird that's just fallen out of the nest. And by calling the fledgling 5, we might expect some of them to be eaten by a cat, or die, or fall out of the nest, or some might learn to fly. We don't know yet. We'll see. So the discourse really, you know, it began in 2014. Just looking back, you know, like all of the 5 local authorities had capacity around energy transition and that kind of stuff. You can really see these local governments fix on the idea of having entering the electricity supply market in early 2014, all of them. And at the same time, a whole series of think tanks like the Institute of Public Policy Research, left-leaning and more right-leaning think tank, Respublica, Town and Country Planning Association, all sorts of think tanks and lobby groups start publishing reports on energy municipalization around the same time. At the same time, again, OVO Energy, who are one of the upstart independent commercial suppliers, they, in the spring of 2014, they launched OVO Communities, which was their kind of like department, which was going to launch partnerships with community energy institutions and local authority energy companies. So all this starts to happen in spring 2014. That's the first public glimmer. And by spring 2015, a year later, they're being publicly launched into the energy market. And these headlines are really from the end of 2015, when the press begins to wake up. Not in a kind of tabloid press kind of way, but in a Guardian way, which is, you know, for us middle-class academics who are a little leftish. We read The Guardian, if you're not familiar with Britain. And you can see how the big... Oh, my God. OK, 10 minutes. Thank you. OK, this is really good. So the way the Guardian bill it, you know, is Nottingham's claim to be not-for-profit power firm. The other headline is from a specialist newspaper, the Local Government Chronicle, from the chief executive of the Southend Borough Council. Our energy is under public control. So this is a very like public, you know, democratic logic, deprivatization logic. The OVO Energy, this is a quote by Stephen Fitzpatrick, a former investment banker who established the private energy company OVO, which is moving in by partnering with local authorities. He expresses it in a slightly different nuance, to democratize the energy market. And I want you to keep that idea in your head and see whether is that oxymoronic, you know, but really different ideas of energy democracy. Is it a local government bringing energy system under a state democratic logic, or is it by increasing market competition, by democratizing the market? So that's really interesting. But finally, the really interesting thing was at the end of 2015, the autumn of 2015, when it really entered the political sphere proper, was around the rupture or the upset in the Labour Party, that someone from the hard left of the Labour Party, who had been a marginal figure, I mean, I knew him. I met him, you know, in small meetings of, you know, Jeremy Corbyn became like a total surprise the leader of the Labour Party. I mean, he comes from this an old-fashioned leftist view where he was saying, I'm going to renationalise the energy system. You know, all the discourse about the big six, ripping off the public. So no, bring it back into public ownership, renationalise. But this was seen as really old-fashioned. So he picked up on the idea of energy municipalisation, or his advisors did, and these 5 energy companies had already been picked up on by social movements and energy democracy movement. Okay, so Jeremy Corbyn and the Labour Party suddenly then shift, and it now talks about it wants to municipalise the British energy supply. And this is really interesting because it says we don't want to go, we want to end privatisation, which has failed, but we don't want to go back to nationalisation. And so it's this discourse of beyond state and market to something else, some third dynamic, a civil society dynamic, an energy commons dynamic. And this is really interesting. You get it going along a lot of the time, that somehow both statized and marketized pathways are exhausted. So we need to move on. So anyway, these are just the kind of common rationales they all advance. Revenue for local authorities, either to cross-subsidize other services like social services, or to subsidise the energy transition, benefits for local area. And this is interesting. So Bristol won the European Green Capital Award. And it really builds its local energy company as a way of, you know, winning the green capital status. It won the award off the European Union, beat Stockholm and capital cities. Very good for a regional city. But also there's the double meaning of green capital, as in sort of reputational capital or the status capital. But this can then attract investment capital. So they talk explicitly, we can attract knowledge economy businesses, new kind of creative businesses with the green energy image. And Nottingham had a similar strategy, but through providing cheap energy to attract business. Social justice, combat fuel poverty, encourage local renewable generation. So like a lot of local renewable generation finds it hard to get access to the grid. A local energy company can offer power purchase agreements, specially offered to local generators, provide whole energy services rather than simply retail energy as a mass commodity. And this is a key selling point of a local energy company, a municipal energy company. It's the combination of energy supply with energy services, where you can encourage the people you're selling the energy to reduce their energy use, and you don't just want to increase that. But this can be done, the second to last point, because the local authority energy company is of the appropriate scale to do what we can call energy governance, which is like energy services, about demand reduction, a whole thing like that. And they can use their face-to-face physical relationships. They deliver social services. Bristol are setting up energy shops, like going right back to when you used to go and pay your gas bill in the local British Gas Board shop. And there they can deliver energy reduction advice and all that kind of welfare and energy governance. And interestingly, OVO, one of the reasons they gave in the interviews for partnering with local authorities is because they've reached the limit of, they've expanded their customer base from nothing to 500,000 in a few years. But they've reached saturation of the young, web-savvy demographic who are used to switching online. And there's the older demographics who aren't used to switching online, but OVO say they can meet them through local authority partners. They can reach these new markets because local authorities exist on the ground in these face-to-face physical relationships where there's crossovers between welfare services and energy services. And lastly, the question of trust, which is the most important. The word trust comes up again and again and again in this discourse of energy municipalization. And it's not just there for the appropriate scale, but the appropriate kind of authority. The word, I suppose, the clue is in the words local authority. It combines local, as in people are familiar with it, they're intimate with the word authority. It's actually the government. It has government authority. And therefore it has enormous trust. And this trust comes from different ways. It's the kind of accumulated reputational capital of the local authority through delivering services satisfactorily. It's also because it has a public service rationale, which is seen as different from a purely profit-seeking rationale. And these are often contrasted with the lack of trust, which is alleged that the Big Six have. And the Big Six are seen as untrustworthy actors because they're privatized maybe, they're profit-seeking, or they're just distant. They're based in a different country, they're globalized. So somehow the local authority has trust because it's local and it's not motivated purely by profit. And this is the big, the big shift, the big thing. So just quickly, within the field of these 5 companies, the big debate is between partnership with OVO, with a private company, or full control. And I've said this revolves around whether to go for their own energy license or a partnership. The pros, this is from the discourse. The advantage is your own license gives you more local control and independence and flexibility to do your own thing and to break from the traditional business model of bulk supply and retail, to have more space to do something different, to pursue you can read the thing, the democratic rationales to do different innovations. The risk, though, the disadvantage is it's enormous cost, it's enormously complex, it's enormously risky. They could mess up. So the OVO partnership with a private company, the pro is the opposite. It's quick to do, it takes 2 months to set up. The OVO takes all the risk and takes most of the cost, takes the responsibilities. But the local authority can gain experience and capacity. And what was interesting in the interview with OVO managers is they said they believe, and also a lot of local governments say, they think they'll gain capacity to maybe gain their own full license after being in partnership with OVO for a few years. So I asked OVO, what's in it for you? And they said, well, we'll find a new niche then servicing these full license thing. But then they kind of expressed it as a kind of mission, a greater mission, that they want to democratize the market, they want to end the monopoly, and, you know, they want to bring this new pluralistic market. Now I do something clever with the slide. Watch this. You have to pay attention. Ha-ha! You see? That was good. Look, go back. Whoa! Anyway. Okay, yes, okay, so I'll just skip all this. The big difference, which is revealed in the next thing. So what I really looked at, okay, so within OVO, there is a tension between the flexibility OVO wants to offer and the standardization. It has to offer a standardized package. Ask me a question about that. This is the big difference I found between the two full license partners. And this is interesting, the flexibility, the full license, that Bristol and Nottingham have gone in totally different directions. Bristol emerged really out of a strong green rationale of the green capital. Nottingham, the energy company idea there, Nottingham wanted to set up a local energy tariff to provide low-cost energy by cutting out the middleman to local consumers and local business customers. And it was a local energy tariff. And they tried to set that up, and they then needed a private partner to do it. And they said, stuff it, let's set up our own energy company to do our own local tariff. So they have very different rationales. And these come out. This is a statement by Alan Clark, who's a director of Robin Hood Energy. And the title, they've named it Robin Hood Energy, steal from the rich, give to the poor, is the kind of idea of Robin Hood, you know, the medieval English folklore hero. And he does three, Alan Clark, who's the director, gives three distinctions. He says Robin Hood is not for profit. Bristol is aiming to make an income for local revenue. It's not, whether Bristol is trying to make a profit, it's actually trying to make a surplus revenue to reinvest. But the distinction Nottingham is trying to make is it's saying we're not going to generate surplus revenue to cross-subsidize things. We will pass on the discount straight to our customers. And we will not prioritize buying locally produced renewable energy. We're just going to buy from the cheapest supply on the national market and pass that discount on to local people. Whereas Bristol want to use their energy company to encourage local production. And so you can see these two different things. And the last point he makes, point 3, is in the kind of structure that Nottingham is much more in-house, but Bristol is much more sophisticated, integrated with the energy transition and local governance. So it's got a much bigger kind of raft of consultants. The tensions, this is my conclusion.
Okay.
Great. Okay. The big structuring tension really is between public ownership and market liberalization. And that kind of tension is revealed in the bottom 4 points. So the big strategic dilemma that faces, and the way that Bristol and Nottingham have gone in different dilemmas is really between offering low carbon or low cost. And we can see that with Bristol. The other real tension is around the political economies of trust. If trust is the essential ingredient that local authorities have accumulated, this ingredient can be dissipated through acting into a commercial rationale, through getting too close maybe to private companies, through having that kind of public sector virtue sullied by contamination from commercial rationales. But also, like a local energy company can cease to be too local. Some of them have plans to retail outside their local area. Will they then be making money from selling energy to a poorer area which doesn't have renewable resources and accumulating that benefit from their own for their own residents who might be more wealthy? So there's that kind of mismatch between what is local, the local area. So there's a whole series of tensions between whether they become too close to commercial rationales, whether there's a mismatch between a local population as citizens who relate to the energy company politically through voting in elections, and as consumers who relate to it through switching, through, you know, they kind of vote with who they pay their bills for. In that, you know, this real tension between consumerism and citizenship. And just therefore to conclude, really what the question is will this marketized regime that they enter into, will they conform to it and adapt to it and really reproduce the existing model of bulk retail, or will they find the space to break from this pattern and innovate new social practices integrated with new technologies? And then lastly, you know, we really need to move just from a concentration on what can municipal energy companies do within a democratized market to look at different relationships between, you know. So my question really to Stephen is, if this is
later on for questions.
Okay.
Move to questions.
Thank you.
Thank you.